suspect if I were seated out there right now, the first thing I would say is, how in the world did we end up with the basketball coach from USC as our guest speaker? Well, what really transpired was I got a call not long ago, and it says, George, we need something light with no message, and you come highly recommended. And so that was how I got the job. To be a dreamer. Some people think it was Robert Kennedy who authored this quotation. But it was really George Bernard Shaw who said, some people see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. Dream, you say? I don't think there's anything wrong with dreaming. I believe that your problem and my problem is that we don't dream big enough dreams. I don't think there's anything wrong with having your head in the clouds as long as you've got your feet on the ground and you're going somewhere in life. I'm dead. You see, because our hearts are beating, our feet are moving, that doesn't mean we're alive. We're only alive when we're growing, when we're prospering, when we're using that vast reservoir of talent that God gave us to do great things. I submit to you right now that everyone in this room is a bare minimum of 25% better than they think that they are. Some of us are 50% better than we think that we are. Because deep down inside of us there's this vast reservoir of untapped talent that God gave us to do great things. This is the formula by which I live my life. That input equals output. That whatever I put into my life is what I'm going to get out of my life. And I govern my life on that one simple formula, that input equals output. That if I put 25% in, I'm going to get 25% results. If I put 50% in, I'm going to get 50% results. If I put 100% in, I'm going to get 100% results. Because life is just like a bank. You can't take any more out than what you put into it. And I'll bet you this, there's not one of you in this room that are getting any more out of your marriage, any more out of your friendships, any more out of your education, any more out of your job than what you're putting into it. So we have to set goals in life, short-range goals and long-range goals. And we've got to be as enthusiastic about that goal as an 85-year-old friend of mine who married a beautiful 21-year-old gal and bought a 9-bedroom house 6 blocks from an elementary school. Now there was a guy who had a hell of a goal. I don't know if he lived through it or not, but if he died, I bet he died with a smile on his face, because he was enthusiastic about it. And what we soon began to understand is that a man or a woman's dreams soon become their reality. That no one's ever hurt their eyesight by looking on the bright side of life. I heard an old guy once say, fear not that your life shall come to an end, but rather fear that your life never had a beginning. And the beginning of a life starts with a dream. And I would say to each of you young people here today that don't be afraid to climb out on a limb, because that's where the best fruit hangs. I read recently in a magazine it said that a man or a woman could live 40 days without food, and that they could live about 3 days without water, and that they could live about 10 seconds without air, but they could only live 1 second without hope. And every day of your life and my life, we have to dream big dreams and then work diligently to make those dreams a reality. And then we step forward to embrace the next fundamental, which is to be a learner. I think that what the real pros in life understand today, that unless a man or woman undertakes more than they can do, they'll never do all that they can. To me, a person who does not read is no better off than a person who cannot read. A number of years ago, when I had the good fortune to be the head basketball coach at Washington State University, I was back in the Midwest on a recruiting trip, and I took a flight from Chicago to Minneapolis and changed planes in Minneapolis to go on to Spokane, Washington. And as so often happens during our travels, the flight was so loud, and I ended up seated beside a young lady who had a tremendous influence on my life. Oh, we talked about a whole host of things during that flight, and memory has obscured a lot of what we talked about, but I do remember some things that we talked about. It turned out that she was a librarian in the school system in Spokane. And she said to me, she said, "Coach, do you realize that 51% of the American population, once they complete their formal education, will never again in their lifetime read a book over 400 pages. She said, "Coach," she said, "do you realize that 73% of the books in American libraries are never checked out?" She said, "Coach, if you read one book a month for 12 straight months, that you'd be in the top 25 percentile of the intellectual elite in the world." And then she stunned me. She said, "Coach," she said, "can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "How much do you read?" And I said, "Well, not an awful lot." And she asked me why. I gave her the excuse that we all find convenient. I said, "I don't have enough time." She said, "Well, Coach," she said, "do you have 15 minutes a day that you could devote to any activity you wanted to?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, Coach," she said, "if you read 15 minutes a day, every day for a year, you could read the equivalent of 20 books." That evening when I got home, I was reflecting on that conversation as I sat on the couch, and I got up from the couch and I went to my den. I went in the desk and I got a white index card and a felt marker. I proceeded to get some Scotch tape, and I took the felt marker and I put 25 on the index card. And I went to the bathroom and I taped it right up in the middle of the mirror. 25. And that was my goal, that a year from that date I wanted to have read 25 books. If you go in my home right now in Ladera Heights and you go in the bathroom, there's a yellow sheet of paper right in the middle of the mirror, and it's got 3 goals on it. And one of them is to read 85 books. And right now I have 7 to go and 4.5 weeks to get it done. You know, I heard Martin Luther King say something in a speech that I have never forgotten. He said that if a man or woman gets behind in a race, they must forever remain behind or run faster than the person in front. And only you and I, in the quiet loneliness of the evening, can ascertain if we're ahead or we're behind in this race for education. I keep a little sign in my den that reminds me of the importance of education. It says, "Give me a fish and I eat today, but teach me to fish and I eat forever." You see, if you give me a fish, you've only taken care of a temporary need, because I'm going to be hungry again tomorrow. But if you teach me to fish, you never have to worry about feeding me again. And the same is true with education. What I learned through the educational process, no one can ever take that away from me. I heard a youngster say at a graduation ceremony not long ago, he said, "Thank God that's over." He said, "I'll never open another book again in my life." And you know what's frightening about it? A large part of our population never does open a book again in their life. Only 3% of the American population own a library card. The last time I checked out, only 4% of the adults in the country had purchased a book in the last year. The average American spends 24 hours a week watching television and spends 17 minutes a week reading. And you must understand that you never graduate from the school of experience. You can send a message around the world in a fraction of a second, and yet it takes teachers years to force a simple concept through a quarter-inch of skull. And I think we learn a lot about where our problems are today. I saw in a men's magazine where it said the average American spends $400 a year on what they put on their head and $40 a year on what they put into their head. I think education can be a lot of fun. It can be like the young lad who went to school one day and the homework assignment was to write an essay on Benjamin Franklin. And the young lad got home that evening and he set a white sheet of paper in front of him and he wrote across the top of the white sheet of paper, Benjamin Franklin. And he wrote this masterpiece. He said, Benjamin Franklin was born in Boston. He soon became tired of Boston and he moved to Philadelphia. When he arrived in Philadelphia, he was hungry, so he bought a loaf of bread. He placed the loaf of bread under his arm and he walked down the street. As he walked down the street, he met a woman and he fell in love with her and he married her and he discovered electricity. And so you can see that education